Do you remember the story of Narcissus? Well, because of this guy Freud, a lot of people associate the story of Narcissus with a very small aspect of its full symbolic meaning. We get fixated on just the part in which Narcissus is reflecting upon himself in the water. But if we just get fixated on that, we lose, I think, what's the deeper meaning and wisdom behind the whole story, the whole myth. Shout out Ovid, the poet who wrote down the earliest version of this myth that we have. It's been probably passed down orally for generations before that though. So the story begins with Tiresias. Now Tiresias is a guy who lost his eyeballs, but then the gods gave him great inner sight. And because he had this great inner sight, people came from far and wide to ask for prophecies, for blessings. And one day, a nature spirit came with her baby to ask for a blessing. Now Tiresias said something weird to this mother. He said, "Your boy will grow old if he does not come to know himself. He will grow old if he does not come to know himself." And people didn't know what the hell he was talking about. But then, around 16 years later, that boy grew up to become Narcissus, the sexy, hot hunter. And he was considered so beautiful that all of the boys and girls and ladies and gents wanted a piece of Narcissus. And in the poetry, it says that they caressed him, they confessed their love for him in vain, for he did not return. And basically, he rejected these nymphs, these nature spirits, until one fateful rejection, that of the nymph Echo. And Echo, she used to be a beautiful storyteller, but then she was cursed by the gods to only be able to repeat the words of others in their voice instead of her own. And so she falls in love with Narcissus, but she's not able to say anything, so she just kind of follows him. She doesn't know what to do. And eventually, as he's hunting, he's like, "There's someone following me, I think." And so he turns around and he's basically like, "Who's there?" And she's like, "Who's there?" And then she eventually comes out of the brush and he's like, "Oh, get away from me." And she's like, "Oh, get away from me." And heartbroken, rejected, dejected, and depressed, she goes away and she just basically withers in the canyons, in the caverns. Now the sister nymphs and nature spirits are pretty, that's pretty messed up. This dude is just, this sexy dude is just going around and rejecting everyone. And look at what happened to our sister. And so this nymph basically prays to Nemesis, which is the vengeance aspect of Aphrodite, that Narcissus may love the way that we have loved him. And then one fateful day, after a long hunt where he's tired and he's thirsty, he comes upon a perfect clearing. And in the middle, there's a perfect pool that is still with beautiful water. And he's thirsty and he goes over to take a drink. And then he sees the most beautiful boy that he has ever seen in his whole life. And he smiles back. And he winks back. And he smirks back. And then he leans in for a kiss, and he leans in too, but then he only touches water. And then he realizes how much of a fool he has been. And he laments to the trees, "Oh, woe is me. The boy that I loved was not here or over there, but it was me." And he hates the fact that he loves just a reflection of himself. But he can't help but look and get fixated on this reflection. And so he neglects his sleep and his eating, and he comes back day after day just staring at this reflection. And eventually, as his, as he cries and as his tears disrupt the pond, the ripples reveal the truth, which is that his beauty and his youth are fading away. And he withers until there's nothing left but a small yellow flower that we call the Narcissus. So let's go back to the very beginning. What did Tiresias prophesize? He said that Narcissus would grow old if he does not come to know himself. And in the literal meaning of that, I guess he didn't technically grow old in age because he died rather young. And he came to know himself in the sense that he saw himself. But there is another deeper symbolic meaning behind this. He will grow old if he does not come to know himself. So in this context, what does knowing oneself mean? Obviously, there's like the aspect of the body and of the beauty of that. But then there's also psyche or soul. And the reason why psyche or soul are linked is because soul is translated from the Latin animus or anima, and that's translated from the Greek psyche, which is what we call psyche. And if you think of like animate, that's the life that is moving the body. And so like the body and the soul are not completely separate in this framework, but rather important parts of just being a living human being. And the situation in which he rejected Echo, reflecting his own voice back at him, is showing that he did not cultivate the beauty of his soul. Because if the voice is the expression of the soul and of the psyche, then he could not bear to listen to his own ugly attitude and his own undeveloped character. And maybe if he had, instead of being like, "Oh, who are you? Get away from me," maybe he would have said, "Hello." And she would have said, "Hello." So his beauty and his rejections were not what cursed him, but rather the fact that he had not cultivated his soul. So if coming to know oneself is encountering the character of one's psyche or soul, and then truly loving oneself is cultivating the beauty of that soul through attending to our attention, our attitude and our action, then that does not wither. It does not grow old, because the opportunity to attend to our attitude and our action is always with us no matter how much our body deteriorates. That if he had cultivated that, then he would not have grown old. And so the prophecy speaks, because he did not know himself, he grew old. So if we're beautifying the soul through attitude and action, what kind of attitude and action should we cultivate? And for this, I turn to some ancient ideals known as the three Transcendentals. These are known as the good, the true, and the beautiful. But the good, the true, and the beautiful have been kind of used in so many ways throughout history. I kind of want to like reframe them or rephrase them to get back to what I think the ancients were really talking about. And that is that which nourishes, that which is harmonious, and that which is reliable. See, for the ancients, the good was that which we should approach because it nourishes us. So the good for a fire is a pile of wood in the forest. And everything that is, here, I guess you could say that the good for the trees is like the sun that they're reaching towards. And then beauty is the way that after reaching for the good, the trees are harmonious. The way that the parts come together do not diminish the whole, and they do not diminish each other. And when we experience that harmoniousness, it's a form of beauty. And in this process of lovingly growing towards nourishment, then we can see how, like, when things are working well, beauty and love and the good, or nourishment, harmony, and the desire for more nourishment are like the process of growth. But what happened with Narcissus? With Narcissus, he had the experience of brief nourishment, he had the experience of harmony, but it was not reliable. It was not true. Because as he kept coming back to stare at the water, it only sapped his soul. It only withered him more and more. And so when that missing element, that truth, that reliableness is missing from the relationship with something, then that is what I see as the process of addiction. And that, to me, is what this myth is pointing towards. You see, as we fall in love with things that are not reliable, that cause us to wither, it pulls us further away from reality. And so our love, as opposed to growing upwards towards the good, spirals downwards towards a lack of nourishment. And then an easy example to see with this is like, I guess these concepts, how it applies, is like internet and social media addiction, where there's a sort of facade of reliableness, and that there's always like new content to continue. There's always new like stuff to learn. Yet when you look at it from the perspective of nourishment, when we keep scrolling, we just get less and less nourished. And because of that unreliability and that like falling in love with that, we spend hours and hours like wasting time in a way, pulling us away from reality. So I'm talking about like reliableness, and I'm curious, if we look at the world as it changes and morphs, is there really anything that's reliable? So if everything's always changing, and it's not like truly like set, then that means that anything that we attach to, in any way that we attach to it, can possibly entrap us, can possibly become a cycle of addiction. And I see that in my own life with like something as simple as certain types of food, or something that is really beautiful like the internet. And so things that are beautiful and good can always become addictive to us. But what is, going back to the principle of reliability, what is reliable? And I guess this is the piece that I take from the ancient Greek tradition, which is that we always have the opportunity to attend to our attitudes and our actions. That opportunity is always there, always reliable at the tip of our fingers, although we don't always take it up. We tend to get lost in just our habitual ways of being and not really like mindfully check in with how we're thinking and check in with the impact of our actions. But if we truly develop the love, develop the craving for our attitudes and our actions to be more nourishing for the people involved, and if we develop the reliable mindfulness to be able to create that space for choice, like the reflectiveness that enables agency, then we can maintain the soul's beauty. Then we can sustain the more harmonious relationships. And so for me, that points to the fact that the development of character, like focusing on that, is ultimately meaning that we can nourish our craving for nourishment if we make that our like principal goal. And it also means that the development of our inner character is a development of right relationship with ourselves, with each other, with the land that we're on, and with the greater world. So if these loving relationships are all kind of chasing after nourishment, what are some of these like types of loving relationships? There are three kind of basic types that the Greeks had these words: eros, philia, and agape. Eros, could be seen as like the root of erotic love. And it's not just about sexuality, it's also about like consuming food. Like to love a cookie is to love it erotically. So what does that really mean? It means that we love things because they nourish us. Now the second type I'll touch on is agape, and that's like a parental love, like taking this sludge of a thing and loving it until it becomes a person. And that sort of love is like loving something because we are nourishing it. And then there's this other love, philia, which is like a fellowship kind of love. And to me, that means it's loving because we are mutually nourishing each other. And really, that word, that form of love, philia, is what is meant to be at the root of philosophy, philia sophia. That relationship, that fellowship, love of wisdom, is what is meant to be at the core of philosophy, not just comparing like beliefs. And so later today we'll be like practicing putting the philia back in the philosophy. But we ultimately, I think a deep part of us ultimately seeks that like mutual nourishment. So I kind of want to tie this into how the nervous system works and like understanding love like biologically and like what insights we can gain from that. So just like a quick nervous system recap. The nervous system, it's like the way that our nerves and neurons all relate to each other, and it produces these weird things we call sensations. And built on sensations, we have these weird things called perceptions, which is like the way that we're paying attention to these sensations. And then built on that, we have these weird things we call emotions and feelings. And we have, built on that, these weird things we call thoughts. Now it's not like a strict hierarchy, like these things all like influence each other in beautiful, dynamic ways. But there's an interesting aspect of love that is beneath all of that, in the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is what controls like our heartbeat, our digestive function, and there's like two aspects of it, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, also like commonly known as fight or flight, or rest and digest. So we're not always consciously choosing at what level our heart is beating, and that's why it's autonomic. But when you look at different forms of loving relationship, it seems to be proven again and again that there is a linking between autonomic nervous systems. In World War II, when these cities were being bombed, they were measuring different people's like heart rates, which is a great like marker for like the level of one's autonomic nervous system. And like in the same, like shelter, you'd have mothers that were dealing with the same stressor of World War II and bombing, but some of them were like had a high heart rate and they responded to it in a very like stressed out way. And then some of the mothers responded to it in a more calm way. They had a lower heartbeat. They, treated it all like a game. And not only were those mothers' heart levels different, but their babies that had no concept of war, no concept of a game, their heart rates were attuned to that of their mothers. The babies that were with like the high heart rate mothers had a higher heart rate, and the babies that were with the more calm mothers were more calm. And that's just one example, but I mean, developmentally, it's really important because we kind of learn how to respond. Our nervous system is learning like how to react to a situation based on like who we're attuned to. And that applies not just for babies, but for, I guess just like adult relationships as well, where we're basically like giving each other access to our autonomic nervous systems. And so you could see the process of like seeing if you're gonna like what kind of relationship you're gonna be with someone as a sort of process of seeing if you want to give access to this person's autonomic nervous system and your autonomic nervous system. And to me, that ultimately means that we have a personal responsibility to ensure that our autonomic nervous systems are reliable, are nourishing, and are harmonious for other nervous systems to attach to. So there's another branch of the nervous system called the central nervous system, and that includes our brain and our spine. And one cool thing is that we can use that part of the nervous system to influence the autonomic nervous system. And one really great way to do that is this thing we call mindfulness. And going back to like the base layer of that like perceptive layer, which is sensation. And that's kind of like while we'll be doing like the mindfulness practice later. But like basically going back to the level of sensation allows us to change all those other things, the perceptions and the emotions and the thoughts, as well as influencing the autonomic heart rate and breathing, etc. So before we actually like do that practice, I'll just like recap it. So like, why did I talk about the myth of Narcissus? Ultimately, I think it's a beautiful symbolic way to understand the process of addiction and how we can fall in love with aspects of ourselves and of reality that are not reliable and therefore wither away and basically like lose the beauty of the soul. And that detachment from reality, like if we really understand like the full meaning of that story, then we can ask, well, what's the opposite process? What's the process of falling in love with reality? How do we connect our nervous system to things that are more real in a strong and dynamic way? And I guess like a very broad, abstract way to say it is that that's the process of beautifying the soul. And this is what like all of these, wisdom traditions like Stoicism and Buddhism are really just trying to like get at, is that we need to focus on the development, the growing of our character. And that the growing of that character is a coming into right relationship with ourselves, with each other, with the land that we're on, and with the world around us. If that's our focus, if that's like ultimately our commitment, then that love that used to be spiraling us downwards can be the love that spirals us upwards. It can be the process and the commitment that replaces addiction. And so growing the character doesn't mean that we stop caring about beauty or stop, doing the work or working out. It means that there's a deep like existential shift in intention. Like instead of working out to have like those Arnold arms, or like relating to people so that we can have a hot person at our side, or have a high follower count. It's like, what if our intention is to come into the right relationship with the land, and that we're meant to move in the land, and that we're meant to explore it, and then maybe you get something closer to Arnold arms, maybe. And what if we focus on like getting into the right relationship with each other, and then maybe you get a hot person at your side, and maybe your follower count raises, but that's not the golden nugget. And I guess that's like the beauty that I'm seeing in these ancient wisdom traditions, is like the focus on the process over the product, and how really freeing that is, because while the product is always over there and always like running away from us, the process is right here and right now. So I'll let that sit. We'll do like the meditative like mindfulness practice, and then we'll like flow into the communication, mindful communication practice. But I'll just I'll intro that because we'll just jump right into it later. So the point of the communication practice we'll do later is to really just speak to each other's depths and speak from our depths. And that means that we have to hold the intention to understand above all else. To listen, to understand their perspective, to speak and to ask in order for them to understand ours. And when two people or more are talking to each other from this like pure intention, then people, at least in my experience, come to like a new level of understanding about the way that their attitude is and the way that they're acting. And so that's kind of like the main ethos of the practice. But in terms of like the practicality of owning our experience, not getting fixated on beliefs, not like advising each other, that means if someone says something that like we kind of disagree with in this practice, instead of like arguing that point or saying, I feel like you're getting it wrong, it's like, go back to the level of sensation. I'm feeling resistance to what you just said. I'm feeling like tightness to what you just said. And so like the sharing of our inner world, and also what we're imagining, like, that ties to like my, the history of like my past, right? And so I'm feeling this tightness. It allows us to like share like our truth, and at the same time like not like hit each other on the head. So yeah, in the end, like the main focus is just understanding a person's perspective and the way that they see themselves in the world as well. So we'll do like 10 minutes of just meditation to let that all soak in. And then we'll go into the communication practice. So we can just kind of tune in and check what your breath is doing. Is it shallow breaths? Is it deep breaths? Do you feel expansion in your belly, or your chest? Just see like what's going on there. And if we go to the level of sensations, what's the top of your head feel like? And what if you were to drip that awareness of your sensations down the front face of your body? Forehead. What it feels like in your eyes, cheeks, your nose, chin, neck, all the way down. And as a whole, what does the front face of your body feel like as you breathe? Now let's go down the back side of the body, from the top of the head, dripping down, the back of the skull, neck, all the way down. What does the whole back face of your body feel like? And what does your whole field of sensation feel like? Do you notice any feelings? Any tightness, any looseness? Any temperature? Just kind of be an explorer in your own inner landscape. Check back in with the breath. What's the breath doing? And now shift our attention to the way we're thinking. What is our thought stream like? What does thinking feel like? And the attention that is constant in your sensation and your experience of thinking. What if we pay attention to that attention? What does it feel like to be aware? If you wish, we can come back to the totality of our sensations in the body and just see what that's like now. What does the body feel like now? Now let's bring this space of awareness, of mindfulness into our next communications. We're basically just gonna sit with the person for a moment and just check in with the level of sensation and see how we're feeling with this person. And just to kind of really get us into that, this is like the warm-up to get us into that mode. We're gonna use the sentence stem, I'm feeling blank. So whatever you're feeling with that person, just speak what it feels like in that moment. Do that for 5 minutes. So now we're gonna basically continue the conversation, but with the added sentence stem, after I feel, of I imagine. Because we're always, we're always imagining, so just speak what that is, whether it's about the person, about ourselves, about stuff in general. So I feel and I imagine. So we're gonna, that was the warm-up in the mindful communication practice. Warm up. We're about to run a marathon. So we're gonna do the journaling practice. And so yeah, if you have a pen and paper, get that out. So this practice is gonna be about looking to reality to develop love for our older self. So, older self. So I want you guys to just kind of look around and just see what's beautiful to you. Like, what's beautiful to you in the space, in the sky, the trees, the ground, whatever? What's inspirational? And if you come up with things that are beautiful to you, just write them down. So if you got that written down, cool. Once you look over those qualities that you find beautiful, or if you just wrote down things that you find beautiful, maybe like dive into what qualities make them beautiful. But if you just wrote down the qualities of beauty that you're seeing, try to like pull all those together into like a symbolic image that just kind of represents all those beautiful things and all those qualities of beauty.
Can you repeat that again? I semi-zoned out.
Oh, okay. So just like all the qualities that you got down, if you could imagine a symbolic image that like pulls all those things together, that represents all of those qualities, what would that be? So if you got that, you can keep writing if you want, but if you have that symbolic image, you could imagine that that is the soul or the psyche of a version of your older self. So if that image is like the soul of your old self, what would like an old version of you that's embodying that look like? Just imagine what that version of you would be like. And maybe just regard them as like a beloved older relative. Try to paint out this image, like make it vivid. What would this older version that embodies this beauty be like? So if that image is clear, then we can move on to the next step. But if you want to keep writing, keep writing. What can you do now, in the present now and in the general now, to lovingly like attend to that beautiful future self? What steps can we take to love that older self? You don't have to have all the answers, but just kind of like let the mind flow. And this what can you do could be about actions, like action steps, but it could also be about the type of attitude to cultivate. Let's switch it up. So let's like mix up and what happened with this practice will kind of be like the topic, like whether there's some things that you're curious about or just what that image was like of your future self. Let that be the starting point that takes the dialogue to wherever it may go.
Are we using the same stems?
Yes. So, I mean, it's not like super strict though, but to come back to like the mindful communication, you can use those steps. Yeah.
How tall they are.
I don't know
today.
whose brains work.
Quick note. You can also take this as a paraphrasing practice where you want to just like make sure that you're understanding what the other person is saying. Just you could say like, so what I'm hearing you say is blank, and like just try that.
Nice.
Okay, so the next thing will be kind of like a partner qigong, just movement flow. So we want to kind of like find space, create space for movement. Seeing, just like how we beginning sat and like felt what it was like to be with the person. Just kind of see like how they stand, and then you can come to contact and like flow with the contact, just with the intention of like just flowing with the person, just like dancing, and then just go slowly at first, and then you can do more like brave movements, So I guess let's like mix up the partners again for this. So let's begin.
Mirroring?
You can start mirroring if you want, but you can also just slowly come to make contact with the hands, and then begin from movement of the hands.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a button.
I don't like a golden change.
Okay. It is 9:45. So thank you guys so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed, found it valuable experience. If you want to support me, you can donate in whatever way you want, but you can also stay and like finish doing a movement practice if you want too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.